Sentiment among South African business people improved slightly but remains subdued. The BER Business Confidence Index edged up by 5 points to 35 points ahead of the national election. Just over a third of the 2,500 businesses that took part in the survey reported to be satisfied with the prevailing business conditions. Confidence rose in 4 of the 5 subsectors except for new vehicle dealers. RMB says the uncertainty around the elections, which was top of mind for many respondents, which could have negatively impacted domestic demand. The other factor is the consistent electricity supply, which could have had a more positive impact on survey respondents. Wholesale traders were the most optimistic, with 53% of respondents satisfied with the prevailing business conditions. Confidence in the retail sector was, however, slightly worse than that of wholesalers, but still increased by 5 points. Confidence among new vehicle dealers largely impacted by the prevailing high borrowing costs, and subdued consumer demand declined by 6 points to 10%. Export demand ticked up marginally, while domestic demand remained sluggish. Well, for more on the BCI, I'm joined by Chief Economist at RMB, Isaah Mhlanga. Thank you very much, Isaah, for joining us. So just give us a sense of when exactly you surveyed these businesses, and presumably the preoccupation will have been elections.
Indeed, the survey was between the 9th and the 27th of May, which predates the elections, which then, mean a lot of the survey respondents would have been concerned about the potential ramifications of coalition arrangements, as it was widely expected that no political party was going to get above 50% majority that is required to push through economic policy without negotiations. That, is quite visible. Many respondents alluded to a wait and see in terms of making long-term investment decisions, which is visible in the still quite low confidence levels. And then if you have to look at the actual confidence itself at 35, to your point earlier on, just over a third of business respondents were satisfied with prevailing business conditions. It means on the flip side of it, about 2/3 remain dissatisfied. But if you look relative to the long-term average of 44, this level of 35% is still way too low, relative to levels that are conducive for stimulating investment and economic growth.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting because the BCI has, just give us a sense of the last time the BCI was above the 50 mark. And on top of that, to what extent do you think sentiment has been lifted to a degree by things like the improved energy supply situation, and also a sense that things may be getting better at Transnet, even though that is going to take some time?
We have to emphasize the point that 35 points is still very low levels of confidence, even though the 5-point increase from 30 in the first quarter must be welcome. It still remains way too low from levels that would help to stimulate, at least encourage investment. But if we have to look at the subsectors and their performance, if you look at wholesalers, confidence there jumped quite significantly to over 50% at 53%, which means over half of respondents are satisfied with prevailing business conditions. In all other sectors, we saw levels that are below 50%.
Yeah.
If we look at building contractors, we actually saw also an improvement to 47, particularly driven by higher confidence in KZN and in the Western Cape. If you have to then look at retailers, also an improvement, but still remaining at levels that are in line with long-term averages. The one sector that you alluded to that showed a declining trend, that is new vehicle sales, you would understand also that it's impacted by interest rate levels that have not declined so far, which influenced to a large extent purchases of new vehicle sales. But even so, overall, levels of economic growth remain way too low, and employment levels remain way too low, and that is the biggest determinant of income, which drives affordability at whatever interest rate is.
Yeah, and of course it's quite important that we have proper economic policies that are implemented to address some of these issues that you're talking about. And just before we spoke to you now, of course, the ANC was giving a briefing around how far it's gone in terms of its discussions with other parties in terms of forming a new government, a new coalition government. It seems as though, you know, we are a long way away before we get a sense of what's going to happen. And in the meantime, that creates a lot of uncertainty, particularly from a market's perspective. But of course, the previously ruling party was indicating that they're very aware not only of markets, but other stakeholders, including, and of course, the most important, South African people, as to what is the best way forward for them. But as we await, you know, this decision and, you know, see what actually happens in terms of a new government, what does it mean for business? Because I'm sure business is equally dissatisfied with all this uncertainty. And you talked about the wait and see. Presumably, they're still going to hold on and wait and see. No one's going to be spending any money right now on investment.
Indeed, we have to separate between market confidence and business confidence. It measures the sentiment of big corporates, medium corporates within the South African economy that largely invest in the South African economy, not necessarily in bond markets. So their views is much more important for gross fixed capital formation, not necessarily for investments in bond markets, which can change on a day-to-day basis in terms of their sentiments. And again, in terms of the horizon over which they invest, the respondents tends to be long-term investors relative to short-term investors in bond markets that can come in and out on the basis of changes in sentiment, but also perceived risks and returns. And having said that, it's quite important for a lot of the respondents that we continue to see the implementation of the structural reforms that are already underway, where we have seen some positive outcomes as far as energy, but in other areas such as logistics, water sector, safety and security, we still remain, progress still remain quite slow. And as a result, whatever the coalition arrangements that would come have to provide a certain environment as far as the policy implementation and the pace thereof that would encourage most of the respondents to take a long-term view and be confident to invest in a way that is going to boost economic growth and job creation.
Indeed. Isaah Mhlanga, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. He's the Chief Economist at RMB.